Well, good morning, everybody. How are you doing today? Hope you guys are doing great. Thank you so much for joining us today and taking time out. If you're a first-time guest with us or whether you're logged in, thank you so much for being with us today. Even though we're in week 3 of a series entitled The S Word, it really doesn't matter because you're going to get, if you're a first-time guest, you're going to get a great picture of who we truly are because servanthood is one of the core values here at this church. We have 7 core values, and servanthood is one that we even built the entire foundation of this church. We hope to be known always in whatever city God allows us to be in for what we're about instead of what we're against. And one of the greatest things that you can be about is serving other people. We have this phrase here at Epic that we say all the time: you're never more like Jesus than when you're serving. Everybody say serving. Come on, everybody, all together. Everybody say serving. Serving is one of those things that connects your heart to the heart of God like nothing else on this planet possibly can. So let's begin in our series verse. If you'll go ahead and turn your Bibles to Matthew chapter 5. We're going to be in verses 14 through 16. And I will actually be reading some today out of the Message translation. I know that's a huge shocker for some of you, but I am because I just dig the way that some of the verses that we're going to be covering today is worded in the Message translation. So if you don't have that, that'll be okay. But we will begin Matthew chapter 5, verses 14 through 16. Jesus says himself to believers everywhere around the world, "You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." And all the way in week 3, we have to deal with a reality in our world today. The reality and the truth about the world that we live in is that there's definitely poverty in the world today. There's definitely broken people in the world today. There's broken homes in the world today. There are people who are sold into sex slavery in our world today. But what I want us to not forget, especially in this particular week of this series, is those things happen in our own backyard. That the city of Decatur that we live in, or the city of Athens, or the city of Trinity, or the city of Moulton, or the city of Coleman, or the city of Hartselle, or whatever city it is that you came to this house today and you gathered in, I want you to understand that there is poverty in your city. In the city of Decatur, there's a reality that there's poverty here. There's a reality that there's broken people here. So we have to begin with kind of a question today. Will we come in this building and wall ourselves off and pretend that that's not happening in our own backyard? Or will we be willing to be a part of the solution? In my opinion, if you're not willing to get yourself outside of the walls that you call the church, which is not really the church, the people that make it up is what is the church. This is just a building. But if you wall yourself off and you come into a building and it's all about praising Jesus but not responding to the call of Jesus to be the light of the world, to be a city on a hill, then I think we really miss the meaning of being a Christian, which just means you kind of inherit your Savior's name. He's Christ. Everybody calls us Christian, so it means to be Christ-like. And Jesus said, "I came not to be served, but to serve many." And so our goal in following Jesus, at least one of them, is to understand the power of servanthood. Everybody say servanthood. One more time, really loud. Everybody say servanthood. So we're going to walk today together in a very practical way of what it means to, because we say this in the church world all the time, I just want to be the hands and feet of Jesus. Well, what does that look like? Like, what does that practically, how does that flesh out in everyday life? And you're going to school life, and I go to work life, and I work 60 hours a week life. I have kids life. I have a wife life. I'm single and wish I had a wife, or single and I wish I had a husband, or wherever it is that your circle of influence in your life happens. How does that practically flesh out? And we talked about that in week 1. So real quick review of the 4 things I said that we needed to do in week 1 was this: live, see, love, and rally. It's where you start, where you live. Everybody say live. You don't have to go off to some far out land. You can start right in your own town, in your own subdivision. If you're here and you live in the country and like your next door neighbor is 100 yards away, that's okay. They're still your next door neighbor. You can walk a little bit and see how they're doing, check on them. Start where you live. And then the next one is see. You have to be able to see the needs around you. Everybody say see. One more time. I'm not trying to teach you Spanish. I just want you to say it one more time. Everybody say see. You got to see the needs that are around you. The third one is love. You have to be activated by love. Love is a verb. Love is a thing that caused you to pursue your spouse, that caused you to pursue your boyfriend or girlfriend, that caused you to pursue something in your life. It was because you said, I am attracted or I am in love with that, and it caused you to do something. It's no different in the life of a Christ follower. Servanthood is called to action by the love of God that he placed in your heart. Everybody say love. Look at your spouse or even the person you came with because you love them and just look at them and say, I love you. Now look at the other one and say, I love you too. You don't have to kiss and all that stuff, but anyway, so whatever. Okay, so the next one is, so it's live, see, love. And then the last one we talked about in week 1 was rally. Everybody say rally. Because here's the truth. You're going to find yourself in a situation where the need is so great that you can't do it all on your own, which is one of the greatest benefits of being involved in a big church. We made no apologies at Epic about wanting to be the biggest church that God would allow us to be. This is one of the great things. I'm actually going to talk about one of the dangers here in just a second of being involved in a big church. But one of the great things is we get to rally together around a need, and we can legitimately affect that need. There are a group of women at this church who just started where they live. They saw a need, love called them to action, and they feed children week in and week out. They didn't come ask our opinion. They didn't ask our permission. They didn't seek out a lot of wise counsel. They just said, we're in a life group together. We see this need. Children need love, and we're going to love on them by feeding them. And that's how it happens. It was in their own backyard in this very city that we call home, and they're doing that. And the cool thing was they were in a life group, and they were able to rally together and do something greater in a group than you can individually. So that is absolutely one of the benefits of being involved in a big church. Like I said, I'm going to talk about one of the dangers in just a second. But how many of you in here have ever read a verse in the Bible that you wished was not in there? Raise your hand all over the... Okay, so most of us are in agreement. There's several times that I read verses and go, I wish you hadn't have put that one in there. I'd be fine with that one not being in there. How many of you read one you never understood, still don't understand it, trying to figure that one out? This is one of those that I just wish you could take it out. But unfortunately, with the Word of God, we don't get to choose which ones we listen to. So it's in there. It's James 4:17. This always causes tension for me, and maybe it does for you. It says this, anyone then, everybody say me, because that's all of us, everybody say me. Anyone then, listen to this statement, who knows the good he should do and doesn't do it, sins. Dang. It's like, I'm trying to focus all my energy on not doing the stuff that I'm supposed to not do, and then God has some sort of weird sense of humor and throws this verse in there and says, oh, by the way, if you don't do the good you know you're doing, now you're sinning. So not only am I sinning when I do stuff I know I'm not supposed to do, if I don't do the thing I know I'm supposed to do, well, now I'm messing up too. Which brings this tension that we constantly walk in, and how does that work out? I mean, how far do you take a verse like this? And so I kind of studied it, and theologians say, they call it this, it's called positive, if there's such thing as positive disobedience, that's what they call it. It's called positive disobedience. It's where you see something that needs to be done, you know it's the right thing to do, and you walk away from it, and you violate your very own conscience. How many of you ever saw something going down, you knew you should have done something about it, said something, made a phone call, stopped, rendered assistance, something was happening, you felt this internal battle to get involved, and you chose to ignore it and go the other way? How many has that ever happened to anybody? That's how that verse plays out. That you literally violate, here's what we do. We violate the image of God in us who draws us to do good. That's how it works out. Let your light shine. God, how do I let my light shine? By being able to quote a lot of scriptures? No. How do I let my light shine? By evangelizing the entire world? Not necessarily. How do I let my light shine? By doing good stuff. By serving other people, by going out of your way to communicate God's availability and God's faithfulness and how you respond when you see a need. That's what that scripture in Matthew is all about. And so I thought we would play a little game. So we're going to answer by raising hands. You're going to get to pick choice 1 or choice 2. And I thought I'd throw some things, because sometimes you get in this place where you go, I don't know how to respond. So I'm going to ask you 2 questions, and you get to pick which one you think you should do. So let's say you're driving down the interstate, driving down 6th Avenue, driving down 24, driving up 31, somewhere on the highway, and let's just say it's raining. Let's make it a little bit more difficult. It's not sunshiny. It's not a nice starry night. It's actually raining. And you see somebody with car trouble. Okay, do you, number 1, do a drive-by prayer and hope it all works out and keep right on driving because now it's raining? How many Christians in here have ever done that? You see somebody on the side of the road and they're struggling, go, praying for you, and just keep right on driving. That's number 1. So how many of you would do number 1 in an honest moment? Raise your hand, because you've done it before, so raise your hand. Okay, so, or do you listen to the voice inside of you that says, stop, render assistance? I'm going to ask you to raise your hand, but which one do you think would be more consistent with Jesus? Not more consistent with our humanity, but more consistent with what Jesus would do, because he tells story after story in the scripture where he was on the road to some way, saw a need, and he put his entire agenda, which, by the way, is pretty important. Like, he's on the way to die for the sins of the world, but yet he had time to stop and render aid to somebody. And our busyness gets in the way, doesn't it? And we think our agenda is super important, but yet the Savior of the world showed us, no, the greatest way to glorify your Father in heaven is by doing good things. And that good thing could be something as simple as stopping, asking somebody, can I help you change the flat tire? Can I give you a jump? Can I give you a ride to pick up that gas? How many of you ever seen the person with the car in the background, the gas can in their hand, and they're on their way, and they're about a mile from the rest stop, throw up a prayer instead of slowing down, giving them a lift? It's that practical and it's that simple. And I'm not trying to make anybody feel bad. It's just the reality of the world that we live in. And if we're serious about being servants to Christ and modeling after him, then he would say, slow down, stop, meet the needs you see. So let's make it a little bit more difficult. Because sometimes we get in sticky situations. How many of you are in here married? Raise your hand. Should be hooping and hollering right now. Okay, how many of you ever had your wife ask you a question about something she bought or something she was going to wear? So now you're forced. Do I tell the truth or do I say what she thinks I want her to say, right? That's how that works, isn't it? Okay, so this actually is a true story that happened in my life about 3 weeks ago. Your wife buys a new headband that she's going to wear to a church event and asks you how you think it looks. You can, number 1, politely tell her you think it's cool, or you can, number 2, say, well, it kind of looks like a crow who got run over by a car. Which one should you say? I won't tell you which one I said, but I'll just tell you this was not the greatest date night for me. Okay, so anyway, sometimes you have to know what to say, when to say it, and what we talked about at date night at Recreate, it's not what you say, but how you say it. So you have to learn to really communicate well. So let's get a little bit more serious, though, because we're moving into springtime, which means water sports are coming up. How many of you dig water stuff? You like to go swimming, skiing, laying out on the beach, whatever, and so going to Panama City and swimming in the ocean. And usually what happens, more times than not, we don't really understand that even at Point Mallard and even in Panama City and different places, people get in trouble in swimming. And this happens all the time. Let's just say you're at the river. You went to somewhere, a place in Athens, the Cow Fort. I mean, everybody know where the Cow Fort is? It's Redneck Beach. Okay, so anyway, so you're there, and you're doing your deal, and you're picnicking, you got your kids, and so some people out there, and they're all swimming, a lot of people swimming, a lot of people on the beach, and somebody starts to flail around. They're gasping for air. You can see them splashing around, but there are a lot of other people splashing around too, and you come to the realization they might be drowning. Now, here's what happens in a person's mind frame when somebody starts to drown. You may have experienced this, you may have not, but just trust me. Here's what happens. Can I legitimately save them? They are 100 yards out or they're 50 yards out. Do I have the strength to go out and assist them? Because most of us have heard about drowning stories where somebody tried to save somebody and they got all beat up and both of them wound up drowning. So there is a danger that if you're going to assist somebody who's drowning, you could potentially be drowned yourself. You're not sure if you have the strength or the ability to go out and save them. So you start to look for other things to throw their way, which would be a life raft or a little ring or something. Like you go through this process of decision making. It's not that you don't want to get involved. It's that you're not sure how. You're not sure if I can. You're not sure that if you get involved, you're not going to be injured. So then you start to scan the crowd for somebody other than yourself to save the person who's drowning. This is such a great analogy to life. Because maybe for some of us in this room today, we know people in our immediate lives that are drowning. They may be drowning emotionally. They may be drowning spiritually. They may be drowning financially. They may be drowning relationally. But you know people in your life who are absolutely drowning. And what I just described is going through your mind every time you see them. Do I have the strength and the ability to reach out and save them? If I go to where they are, will I myself be drowning because I used to be there and I really don't want to go back there? Can I find something to throw their way? Maybe I'll send them an email. Maybe I'll send them a text message. Maybe I'll poke them on Facebook and maybe they'll get this realization that I really do care. Or, this is the worst one, I'll just pray for them. I'm not saying you shouldn't, and I'm not saying you don't talk to the creator of the world, but if you talk to the creator of the world and you do pray for him, chances are pretty high he's going to say, well, now what are you going to do about it? Because they are drowning. And then what happens, what do you do with the big issues of life? Like sex slavery, homelessness, poverty. Like that becomes something much larger. I mean, imagine if you're looking at the water and 10 people are drowning. What do I do now? I can't save all 10. So what begins to happen as humans, we disengage. Why do we as humans evade the responsibility of rescuing the very people that Jesus called us to reach out to? Social scientists give us at best about 2 reasons. And here's what's cool. It's not because human beings are mean. This is what has always baffled me. People will say, well, human beings are grotesquely awful people. No, they're not. Every human, regardless of where you're at on their spiritual journey, are created in the image of God. And you don't want to be mean. At the very core of who you are, you don't want to be mean. You're not disinterested. You value the people who are drowning. You legitimately want to help, but there's something that takes place, and this is found by social scientists. And number one is this. And we won't talk about this one very much, but this does happen. We go through something called the "it's not my fault" syndrome. Here's what that means. Have you ever looked at somebody and they made a decision and the consequences they're going through, you would say, well, they brought that on themselves. That's not my fault. Matter of fact, it's their fault. So it's their bed. They made it. Let them, everybody say, sleep in it. It's this thing we go through. We go, well, that's not my fault. That's your bad. So you deal with it because I got my problems of my own and I'm going to do my own life. The problem is it really doesn't line up with James 4:17. It says, if you know the good to do, which is rescue the drowning people, you don't get to say, you're bad, I'm going to keep doing my deal. But that happens in the minds of most human beings. The next one is this, and this is the one that happens the most. It's called the bystander effect. And here's what that means. You will see it on beaches. You will see it at car wrecks. You will see it in malls. You will see it on the street. You'll see this happen everywhere. Somebody gets in trouble, and the more people that are standing around watching, the less likely any one person is going to be involved. Because we all assume that the person next to us will make the call or step in and help. It's called the bystander effect. Everybody say bystander. One more time. Everybody, all over the auditorium, everybody say bystander. So in the bystander effect, there's 2 things that happen. We undergo what's called social influence. Social influence designed is this. Bystanders, people standing on the wall watching the event, monitor the reaction of everybody around them. And because everybody's reaction is the same, which is, by the way, doing nothing, we all assume that no help is needed. That's called being socially influenced. Anybody ever heard of the term peer pressure? Kind of the same deal, it's just flipped. Okay, we watch, everybody's doing the same thing, so I'm going to do what they do because obviously nobody needs any help. The other one is this, diffusion of responsibility. This occurs when the observers all assume somebody else will do something. Well, if everybody assumes that somebody else will do something, then guess what? Nobody does anything but watch it happen. They came up with this, and there was a study done because in the 1960s in New York, there was a murder that took place. It took 45 minutes to happen. The murderer came back 3 times. 38 people stood on the sidewalk and watched it happen. Why? 2 guys actually asked the same question. And they discovered it was this thing called bystander effect. All 38 people said, I was hoping somebody would do something, but I thought the person across the street would. And so here's what happened in that 1960 murder of this young woman. Nobody called the police, and nobody interjected, and nobody responded in any way. And they watched the death happen over a 45-minute period, and the assailant came back 3 times because of this very thing called the bystander effect. We all assume that because the crowd is so large that somebody will do something. Now, I told you there are great joys in being part of a big church because you can rally around a cause and you can get great things done. But this is one of the greatest dangers of being involved in a big church. It's called the bystander effect. It's really why 20% of the church does 100% of the work and 80% sit and watch. Why? Because you come to an auditorium that seats about 1,000 and there's 3 services here, and you come into this place and you go, do I really have anything to offer, and can I respond to the drowning people? And if I do, will I get caught up in it, and will I drown? And do I have really, they have so many people, I'm sure every need is being met and everything's getting done that needs to be done. And if I sit here, probably the person that sits across the row from me is going to get involved, or this person is going to get involved. So I'm just going to come and go home. But here's what the devil tells you. They don't need you. That's the danger of being involved in a big church. The joy part is we can get a lot of stuff done, but only if we get rid of the bystander effect in a super large church. I don't want 20% of you being involved. I want 100% of you being involved, because then we can do even greater things. We can rally together and actually make a difference in every city that we come to. But what we have to understand is just because it's a big church doesn't mean that every need's being met. Just because it's a big church doesn't mean that we don't need band members, or we don't need people in Journey or in Quest or parking lot guys or greeter or tech booth. Actually, if I'm honest, we don't have enough to do what we've been called to do. Because 20% of us are doing 100% of the work, because 80% of all of us in this church have let the bystander effect affect us being involved in the kingdom. And so what I want to do is take that away and introduce to you how to get to a place where you can actually engage in what God is calling you to do. So in doing that, we're going to start in Matthew chapter 10, verses 5 through 8, out of the Message translation. I know this is blowing your mind because I hardly ever read out of it, but I'm going to read it out of this one. I love what Jesus says. He says, don't begin by traveling to some far-off place to convert unbelievers. It's not that Jesus is against missions to China. That's what it sounds like. He says, don't start by running off to some other country to convert unbelievers. It's not that he's against that. He just knows that I have placed the local church in the locality that I want it in because it's needed in that place. You know what else is a danger in the city that we do church in? There's 100 churches in the city of Decatur. So every church in the city of Decatur says, well, I guess we hope the other church does it. Well, the other church will do it. The other church will do it. And the city of Decatur winds up going to hell. Because nobody accepts the responsibility and steps into what the church is called to be doing. And Jesus says, don't start by running out of your city. He actually says this. And don't try to be dramatic by tackling some public enemy. Go to the lost, confused people right here in the neighborhood. Tell them that the kingdom is here. Bring health to the sick, raise the dead, touch the untouchables, kick out the demons. You've been treated generously, so live generously. Think about that very last statement. You've been treated generously, so live generously. Here's what he's saying. Jesus stepped into your broken world. Jesus stepped into your drowning life, and he rescued you, and now he's asking you to actually go and rescue other drowning people. Some translations say, you freely received, now go and freely give. What would it look like for a church to grasp this concept? to not run off to China. And listen, I'm not saying that's what we do. Epic Church is in Africa. I think we should infect the whole world. But we would not go to Africa until we felt like we had a really great grasp on the city of Decatur. But it doesn't mean once you go to Africa, you stop doing what you've always done. It doesn't give you permission to let go of the city that you're in. Actually, it brings greater responsibility to infect the city that you're in. So what would it look like if we maintained who we've always been forever and eternity? And what would it look like for a church to truly, freely give as you have freely received? In order to get through the bystander effect, here's what social scientists say has to happen. There's about a 5-step process. Week 1, we said see. Everybody say see. Everybody say see. We're going to start in that same place because this is what happens in the Western world. We get too caught up in our lives and our agenda and our programming, and we don't do this, which number 1 is you have to notice the event. More people drowned in Panama City because nobody notices them drowning. Everybody's splashing. Everybody's frailing. And I don't notice the very one who's about to die. How many of you know in our world today, everybody's trying to survive? Everybody's trying to keep their head above water. Everybody's treading water the best that they can. And so because we're doing the same and everybody else is doing the same, we're just trying to survive, we never really notice the person who's about to die and drown. And Jesus says this whole chapter in John chapter 9 is actually devoted to Jesus healing this blind guy. And what the cool part of the story is he heals the blind guy, the blind beggar, and sends him home. And I want to pick up there with what happens when he goes home. And it starts out by saying his neighbors. Okay, so imagine you live in a subdivision. And when you were coming out of the subdivision, you know how the subdivisions have little block walls and you drive out of the subdivision to get to the main road. Imagine there's a blind guy that lives in your neighborhood and he sits at the gate of the subdivision every single day and he does this and he's begging for money. You pass him every single day. You pass him taking the kids to school. You passing him bringing the kids home from school. You pass him going to work. You pass him going to the grocery store. He's there every single day. He's blind and he's begging. And then he comes back into the neighborhood one day. This is where we're at. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, because Jesus heals him, he can see now, "Isn't this the man who used to sit at the city gate blind and begging?" Some claimed that it was. Others said, "No, it just looks like him." Some said, "No, it's not him because he was blind. That can't be him. This dude sees." And others said, "No, it's his twin brother or somebody looks like that's really not him." And the once blind guy goes, "No, it was me. I'm the one it's me. I was blind, now I can see." The reason they didn't know it was him is because he was just a part of their everyday scenery. They didn't notice him. So here's a quick question. How many of you live in the city of Decatur? How many of you noticed the guy sitting outside the parking lot, coming into Publix from Calvary Church? Sits there every single day. He's there morning, noon, and evening. Chances are the majority of us don't notice him anymore because he's just part of the scenery. Chances are some of us have probably said, "I'm not going to give him a 20 because it's not my fault. He chose that." Or chances are there's a lot of people who pass him every day, so why would I stop? Somebody else will. Can I tell you what the next car thinks? Somebody else will. Can I tell you what the next car thinks? Somebody else will. And nobody's responding to this guy's need. Now, you can psychoanalyze it and say he's probably capable of getting a job. He's probably working the system. He's probably. And all the while, you never can tell because Scripture says that God sets up angels on the earth to see how we will respond. It's a huge challenge to myself, and it's a huge challenge to all of us in here. But you have to notice the event. And the second thing you have to do is you have to realize it's an emergency. Now, this is the hardest one because all of us have been through trouble. All of us, to some degree, are trying to keep our head above the water, and we look at somebody else's plight, somebody else's situation, and here's what we do. That's not that bad. I went through that 10 years ago. Well, can I tell you what it is to that person going through it right now? Emergency. Everybody say emergency. This going to hell in a handbasket in their life. They cannot see above the water right now. Thank God you went through it successfully. Now what are you supposed to do? Notice the event and move in their direction. But you have to realize it's an emergency. Listen to what Jesus says about this very thing. Out of the Message translation again. When Jesus looked out over the crowds, his heart broke. So confused and aimless they were, like sheep with no shepherd. He's look, this phrase, clueless and aimless, means Jesus is basically saying, in a 21st century kind of saying, well, yeah, they're surviving, but they could drown at any minute. They're keeping their head above water right now, but we never know when that's the last time they bob above the water. You got to notice the event, and you got to realize it's an emergency. It's not time for you to plan and to wait. It's time for you to react. And then number three, you have to assume responsibility. You have to assume responsibility. Social scientists say the only person that respond to people who are drowning, the only person who respond to people who are in trouble are those who are willing to say, I'm going to make a difference in this one's life. I'm going to assume the responsibility that nobody else seems to be assuming, which is why I absolutely love this church. I love all of you. I love what we stand about, because the truth is there are a lot of churches in Decatur, and we could get the attitude where we go, okay, we're not going to engage in that need because that church or that church or that church is probably going to do it. So here's the mindset we try to train ourselves in. We live as if we're the only church in Decatur. Think about that. Because now I don't get to say, well, they'll probably respond. I assume the responsibility that Decatur, Athens, Moulton, Trinity, and surrounding cities are broken. There's poverty in it. There's people who need a church to come to that they won't be judged. It doesn't matter what they wear. It doesn't matter what they were doing last night. It doesn't matter what they're going to be into next week. It's just a place that you can come and be a part of what God is doing and watch Him change your life from the inside out. We decided to assume that responsibility. All of us have to assume that responsibility every single day, no matter where we are, and it causes us to act. Listen to what Romans 12 says. Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Honor one another above yourselves. I love this verse. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep up your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with God's people who are in need, and practice hospitality. Here's what God's saying. There's a lot of needs. There's a lot of stuff going on. But don't ever not be fired up about it. Be fired up as you get the opportunity to serve the homeless. Be fired up that you get the opportunity to serve the poor. Be fired up that you get the opportunity to share the good news with the spiritually broken, because that's my plan. And I need you to not ever lose this internal passion to do that very thing. So real quick review. You have to notice the event, realize it's an emergency, assume the responsibility, and then number 4, this is hard for us. You need to know what to do. Now here's the truth. How many of you ever got the opportunity to go visit somebody really sick in the hospital? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you ever got the opportunity to go visit somebody who had just had a death in their family? Let me tell you what you didn't know what to do. Right? Like what am I going to do? They're sick. I don't know what to do. I'm going to a funeral home. I don't know what to do. You know what's cool about the book of Job? Job had a bad day. I don't know if you've ever read that book, but Job's day was sucking. I'm just going to like, it's bad, okay? It's about as bad as it can get. And he's got some buddies that's going to come to his aid, and they're all trying to figure out, well, what are we going to do? And can I tell you what they did? They just showed up. The Bible literally says they sat with him for 7 days silent. Can I tell you the best thing you can do when a loved one is sick? Just go. Because here's what you're not going to say something cool that makes it all better. If somebody has a loved one who dies, here's what you do. Just go. You're not going to say something that's going, please don't say, this is awful. Please don't say, they look so natural. No, they don't. They're dead. There's nothing natural about that. I wish people were comfortable in silence, because silence speaks more to your concern and your compassion than the dumb Christian stuff we say to try to fix it. Just go and hug them and say, I love you. Because that speaks more. So if you're in a place, if you see a need and you're like, I don't know what to do this. Do the one thing you know to do, show up. And then the last one, after you've walked through all these processes, the last one, number 5, is act. Everybody say act. We don't get We don't get to excuse this one away. So one more time, all over the auditorium, really, really loud, everybody say act. Because actually, this is what we should be doing all the time. Jesus writes this in Luke 15, 3 through 7. This is out of the NIV. Jesus shows up at a party. I love this about Jesus was always going to parties he wasn't supposed to go to. And this particular time, he shows up at a party, and there's a bunch of unholy people there, a bunch of sinners. And the religious people think they bust him at a party. How many of you ever were a teenager and got busted at the party? Okay, this is what they feel like they're doing. They feel like they're busting the young rabbi at the party that he's not supposed to be at. So he's at this party with a bunch of sinners, and the teachers of the law show up, and they say, you're supposed to be, and I'm paraphrasing before we get to this part, you're supposed to be a holy teacher of God. If you're supposed to be a man of God, why are you hanging out with all these sinners? Here, translation, IV version, if you're so holy, why are you so concerned about all these broken people? And Jesus, in his infinite wisdom, responds with a story. How many of you have to Papa that always responds with a story? Like you ask him a question, he tells you a story, and you're trying to figure out what's the story mean. Okay? That's what Jesus does almost every single time religious leaders try to corner him. So Jesus comes up, and the Bible actually says Jesus told them a parable, which means he tells them a story. I love this story. So they've just attacked him. The religious leader attacked him for hanging out with broken people, and he says this to them. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Does he not leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and his neighbors together and says, rejoice with me, throw a party. Jesus is all about parties, I'm just telling you. You just need to know that. He says, he throws a party. I have found my lost sheep. Now listen to what he says. This is cool. It's because some of you need to get this today. I tell you that in the same way, there will be more partying in heaven, or rejoicing, over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people who don't need to repent. So here's what I want to tell you today. This is so cool. If you're here today, and you're like not a God person, not a church person. And you look around the room, and there's hundreds of church people in here. You need to know that Jesus in heaven is rejoicing over the fact that you're here. More than he is the hundreds of church people that are here. Like, that's what this story means. And in Jesus' time, here's kind of how, this is why this parable meant so much in his culture. If you were a shepherd and you had 100 sheep, you were considered to be very wealthy. Like 100 sheep is kind of a big deal. And you were considered to be extremely rich. And the ideal would be, if I have 100 and I lose one, I don't really need to waste the time and the energy to go find that one, because here's what that one has done. Let me tell you here's what people don't understand in this culture. We don't understand in this story why the sheep would have been lost. Let me tell you why the sheep would have been lost. Because he was being stupid. Sheep are dumb, and they know to stay together. And they know to listen to the shepherd, because if they don't, they're going to find themselves. So every time a sheep is lost in Jesus' culture, one of three things has happened. They've done something dumb and gotten themselves caught in a trap. They've gotten themselves injured, or they've been stolen. That's the only three ways that sheep get lost. Because sheep know I need to stay with other sheep and I need to stay with my shepherd. So if one is not there, it's because they were trapped and they can't get out. They've hurt themselves and they can't catch up, or they were stolen. And Jesus tells this parable and says, you know, if you had 100 sheep and you're a good shepherd and one of them is not there, you know you're going to go find them, because you know they're hurt, they're trapped, or they've been stolen. So the cool thing about this story, and we sum all this up today about the real S word, is Jesus is the good shepherd. And he noticed the event of the brokenness of humanity. And the truth is, we as sheep, when we're not connected to the Good Shepherd, to the Father's heart, can I tell you why? It's because we've gotten trapped, we've been hurt, or we've been stolen. And God sent Jesus, the Good Shepherd, to rescue the one lost sheep. So if you're here today and you're like a church person and you're saved and you've been found, you were once blind and now you see, can I just tell you, I think that's awesome, but your call is not necessarily what I'm talking about today. Your call is to become co-workers with Jesus and go find the lost sheep that are stolen, broken, and injured and bring them to God's house that they may hear the good news. If you're here today and you're totally not a church person, you're not a God person, and you've just realized, I'm the one sheep. I'm broken. I've been stolen. There's been some things stolen from me. My joy, my happiness, my peace. Or you would say, I'm injured. I've been burned by church. I've been burned by religion. I've been burned by a lot of people. And you find yourself in this place today, broken. I really do believe that God sent you to this place and this day in week 3 of the S word to say, I've come to rescue you. I noticed your event. And I moved in your direction, and I have all the power and all the ability to deliver you. I'm not really worried about me. I'm so much not worried about me that I went and died on a cross for you. And death so much didn't worry me that I conquered sin and death for you on the 3rd day. And I'm making available to you today, not thrown you a life raft. I think that is the worst analogy in the Christian church. Jesus didn't throw you a life raft. Jesus came out to the deep end. And pulled you to shore. Set you up on solid ground so that you don't have to drown anymore. And those of you who have experienced that, all he's asking is to do what he did for you. But if you're in here and you would like to not drown anymore, I'd like everybody to bow their heads and close their eyes in this moment. And the Bible says if you believe in your heart and confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, you'll be saved. So here's what I'm going to make this as simple as I can make this, because I believe this is the greatest prayer that any person can ever say. Just say, God, I'm drowning. Save me. If you prayed that prayer today, in this moment, I want to ask you to do one thing. I'm going to count to 3, and I just want you to raise your hand. I just want you to leave it up. And I don't want you to be ashamed of it, because I just want you to say to everybody all around, especially to yourself, today, God saved me from drowning. 1, 2, 3. Raise your hand up all over this auditorium, wherever you're at. Awesome, awesome, awesome.